Hey, what is going on, guys? Jake Verdon Tech here, back with another video. And today we're going to be talking about my daily driver gaming slash editing PC. And more specifically, we want to see how this PC performs here in 2020, very late 2021 and going into 2022. For the most part, we're doing this because my PC actually has some hardware that's aged quite a bit. Most of this hardware has come from like 2017, 2018, and that being like Pascal series graphics cards. So we have like a 1080 Ti, and we do have a Coffee Lake CPU from Intel, which happens to be the i7-8700K. So I really want to see and show you guys how this thing stacks up on the latest titles here in very late 2021 and going into 2022. As far as the hardware goes, I've had it all for quite a while, and it's kind of gone from different builds as I've done, regular mid tower build. I've had some of this hardware in an ITX build. So it's all been kind of tossed around, but this particular build that we're talking about, I've had built since September of 2020. So this iteration has been around for a little bit and I'm still using it today. So going over the hardware, the main thing is probably going to be the GPU, and that happens to be a NVIDIA GTX 1080 Ti. And this one happens to be the EVGA for the Win 3. For the CPU, we have an Intel i7-8700K. So this is from the Coffee Lake generation of Intel CPUs. For the RAM, we have 32 gigs of G-Skills Trident Z RGB RAM. And this PC does have a full water-cooled loop, mainly with EK water blocks for the actual water blocks on my CPU and GPU. We do have an EK pump and wet reservoir combo, and then we do have the bits power fittings with hardline tubing, and this entire build is housed inside of the full tower Enthus 719 from Fantex. So the main thing we're taking a look at in this video is the overall gaming performance on some of the latest titles. We're not so much looking at the temperatures as I'm running this, but we're mainly shooting for average FPS on different games. And as far as the games go, we have a variety of the latest titles. Many of these are first-person shooters, but I have Call of Duty Vanguard on the list, Call of Duty Warzone with the new Caldera map, Halo Infinite, Valorant, and we are going to try and play Battlefield 2042, as I didn't want to spend the money on it again, as I do already have this on my Xbox, but I've been told that it is free to play this weekend, so we're going to install that as well and see if we can get an average FPS for Battlefield 2042 also. So I think a video like this can be very helpful to somebody who is maybe they really want to upgrade their graphics card, but with the current market availability, scalpers, all the factors that are preventing us from being able to acquire a lot of this hardware, this can give those people a really good idea on how this hardware performs on some of the latest titles. And I almost forgot to mention, we are going to be running this all on my Alienware AW2521HF, which happens to be a 1080p 240Hz IPS display. So it's a very high-speed monitor, kind of made for competitive gaming. And we're going to be running all these titles on that particular monitor. So with all that out of the way, guys, we're going to get started with the testing. I will have some different graphs on the screen with mainly the average FPS, but I might sprinkle some other stats in there too, just to give you an idea on how the 1080 Ti performs on a lot of these newer titles. Alrighty guys, the tests are in, and now we're just going to break down some of the gameplay and talk about the overall gaming experience when it comes to running these new titles on this hardware that is a little bit older. So starting off, we have Call of Duty Vanguard, which in this case I kind of have some custom settings I'm running just because it's a very fast-paced FPS. And in this case, we are trying to just get the most amount of frames possible. And for that kind of competitive gameplay, we're not really going for like really intensive graphics. We're lowering the quality on a lot of that just so we can get the most frames possible. So I kind of have some custom settings running. I usually go through and turn off all of the extra kind of fluff graphic settings like motion blur, stuff like that can definitely hinder your performance a little bit. And then overall, I've kind of put these settings around low to medium. And for the results, we are looking at the low end on the FPS at 119 frames per second was the lowest FPS we saw on the counter. For the highest, we got 185. And then on average, we're around that 152 mark. The lows and highs should be taken with a grain of salt. I just decided to put those in there from what I saw on the counter. And there's just so many variables to all this. So we'll kind of emphasize the range that we saw most, so kind of close to the average. So for me, playing Call of Duty Vanguard at the medium low custom settings I had set for it, we were seeing mostly around the 150 to 160 range, and then you would get those bursts where you would get above that, and then sometimes you would get those drops that go a little bit below. Overall, with my custom settings and playing Call of Duty Vanguard on this hardware that's a little bit aged right now, the overall experience was really good. Next up, we are jumping into Call of Duty Warzone, which is a title I do not play often at all. So the settings for this I left pretty stock as they just got the new Caldera update, and it's been so long since I've opened up this game. I pretty much left all these settings stock, and they usually are around high when you install the game. So for the low end on our FPS, we would touch around 90 and then going up to the high end around 136. But on average, we were seeing around the 110 to 120 FPS range most commonly. I was kind of surprised that Warzone, being a very large open world battle royale map where you have a lot of different types of terrain, and we have to take into consideration too, a lot of these titles are so new, they're not quite yet optimized, and there's still new driver updates coming out, even on, a little bit older cards like the 1080 Ti. So it's not at its fully optimized point, but I am surprised with Call of Duty Warzone now that we weren't seeing bigger fluctuations in our frame rate. Usually you can expect some pretty crazy frame rate differences from when you're maybe inside a building on the map and your viewing distance is very close, opposed to going outside like on top of a mountain where your viewing distance is much further. You can expect some very different frame rates in that a lot, but in Warzone we weren't really seeing huge fluctuations, which made the gameplay a lot better. Now for the title that I was most anxious about and that I've been playing the most lately, but mostly I've been playing this on my Xbox Series S, but I wanted to experience this title on PC and see what the frame rate and performance is like. I was a little bit surprised we weren't seeing much higher FPS for Halo Infinite, but the game felt extremely good and everything was pretty tight as far as our lows, our highs, and our average FPS. We weren't seeing huge fluctuations where you get that notable frame rate drop here and there depending on where you are on the map. That was completely non-existent. The game ran extremely well, and I did leave it on stock settings, which in the case of Halo Infinite is medium settings. I did try switching it over to low settings to see if we can get any sort of FPS bump, and it was pretty much exactly the same. I would be curious to see how a little bit newer graphics card like an RTX 1080 Ti or 3080 Ti performs with this title. But overall, even though we saw an average of 110 FPS and we were around that 110 to 120 range for most of the gameplay, the game felt extremely solid. Next up, we have Valorant. Even though this isn't an absolute latest title, it did come out in 2020 and it's still extremely popular in 2021. And I think it is a little bit different FPS that is definitely worth taking a look at as far as performance goes, as this game just runs so well. Like CSGO, this game is really one of those that you can really see what kind of performance that your graphics card can push as far as the amount of frames it can output with a title that is optimized so well. And in the case of Valorant, on the low end, we were getting around 165 FPS. For the high points, we'd see around 300. And then on average, we're around 230. And one thing to really note with this one and all these other titles that we're talking about, when I'm mentioning the lowest FPS and highest FPS, those are the numbers that we're seeing on the counter. And the amount of time that the counter might actually see that, it could be milliseconds. So a lot of these frame rate drops, when you do get the low points, they're there for such a short amount of time, it's barely even noticeable to the input and to the player. And in the case of Valorant, we saw 165 for probably around a tenth of a second, and then it would spike right back up to like 190, 200. So it wasn't even a noticeable frame rate drop, but I thought it would be worth mentioning in this title and the other titles we've gone over. But no surprise, Valorant, it's an extremely well optimized title. It's not very graphically intensive with most of the maps, and everything's kind of smooth textures, allowing this game to have super high frame rates. Last but certainly not least, we got the chance to try out Battlefield 2042 on PC to really get an idea on how this game performs on some older hardware, which I was really curious about. And in this game, we are talking big maps, a lot of explosions, a lot of action going on, definitely a lot of things and objects in game that can kind of hinder performance. But overall, we saw an average of 76 FPS. Our lows would be around 64, and our high points were around 87 and 90, which I thought was pretty solid for out of the box settings. And I put recommended settings because in Battlefield, when you go over to the display and video settings, when you see the graphics quality, it was set to auto, and all the fields below were set to medium. So I believe when you input auto, it probably takes account for the hardware that you currently are running and puts the recommended settings for that hardware. So I did leave it on medium, and the only thing I messed with was the motion blur. I turned all the way down to 0 and made sure VSync was disabled. And once again, on this title, I was pretty shocked how tight the FPS counts were. Going from the average, lowest, and highest, we didn't see giant fluctuations, which I was kind of surprised about. Once again, having very large maps, a lot of vehicles, and tank explosions. There's a lot of things going on in Battlefield that can really cause frame rate drops in certain artifacting like that. And I believe this is going to be one of those titles too where certain driver updates and game updates will definitely help the performance over time for a larger multitude of hardware. So I think doing a test in a video like this highlights a few things very well. First one being that you can definitely play some of the latest titles on hardware that is a few generations old. Now this doesn't speak for all GPUs that are in the Pascal series or older. As in this video, we just tested the 1080 Ti. Other cards in Pascal and even older like Maxwell series cards like 980s, 970s will definitely show their age a little bit more and probably won't get near the performance of this 1080 Ti. But with that being said, there is definitely justification for looking into the used hardware market if you are looking to upgrade, as cards like the 1080 Ti perform really well on some of the latest titles, and there are a lot of 1080 Ti's out there. You may know somebody that it just upgraded their system, maybe got a new pre-built or actually got their hands on a 3000 series card and is looking to sell or part out their previous setup. And the second factor that this video kind of highlights is sometimes when you are looking to upgrade, in many cases it is definitely worth going with the flagship card, even though it does come with a cost. But in that cost, I feel like it really buys you time and longevity when it comes to owning the graphics card. And as the card ages and newer titles are coming out that do require more and more GPU performance, the card having more performance will definitely age a little bit better year after year, opposed to buying a card that's kind of in the mid-tier to budget level range where those cards just won't age nearly as well. So it is definitely worth taking your time and doing the research and seeing which card really has the best price to performance per generation. And it is kind of tough to make that statement right now given the GPU market because, like I said, buying flagship model cards right now like the 3080 Ti, 3080 will buy you more time and longevity in the long run. But right now that is coming with such a large premium. It's definitely hard for anybody to pull the trigger on that kind of price. And then behind it comes the mid-tier cards, which are coming in at what the even higher than what the flagship cards should be. And then your budget range cards like the 3060s are kind of coming in around where MSRP would be on like a 3070 or 3080, which the whole market is just insane right now. So I definitely recommend for those that are out there looking to upgrade, take a look at the used market and see if you can pick up something like a 1080 Ti that is in good shape and it wasn't mined with or overclocked, or you might know somebody that took good care of one. Or if you do want to go with the new option and get into, 20 series or 3000 series cards, I would definitely recommend looking into the pre-built option and just try to find a pre-built where the components add up to what the price would cost at MSRP. So that's going to wrap up this video, guys. Thank you for clicking on this one and checking it out. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful, make sure to drop a like on it. And if you want to see more tech related videos like this one, be sure to subscribe. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.